I hope you had a good 4th of July. We had a good time at our house, and our grandkids have all gotten over their fear of fireworks, so we were able to have some sparklers and things like that, so they had a good time with that. But of course, we don't want to forget the whole purpose of that, and that's remembering the birth of our country and celebrating the good of what the country is that we enjoy today, and being grateful to God for the blessings that we have. We should be a grateful people, should we not? Has there ever been a nation that's had the material blessings of our country or the security blessings of our country? I don't know in history. You know, we live in a way that 100 years ago would have been considered to be just the realm of the elite of the elite. And for us, it's available to almost all of us. And I think we have to recognize how blessed we are and be grateful to God for the blessings that we have. It is not necessarily the only alternative that history could have showed us. And so we have to say, God has been good in many ways to us. And not only the material blessings, but also the freedoms that we enjoy as a country. And today, I just wanted to talk about that and talk about the question that we have that comes up quite often in Christian and political circles is, are we a Christian nation? And how do we as Christians live in this country in the way that God would have us live? And I just have one passage that I want to read to you today to start off. It's 1 Peter 2, 11 through 17. This is what Peter wrote to his listeners, to his readers. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Submit yourselves, for the Lord's sake, to every human authority, whether to the emperor as a supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. As Peter writes, this is very early in his letter. This is the second chapter in his letter, and he is writing to Christians around the empire, the Roman Empire. And one thing he tells them is that they are foreigners and exiles. So we should recognize that as Christians, this is not our home. We are aliens, not illegal aliens, but we are aliens. We are living in a world that is not ours because our home is another place. I know you probably heard the saying, this world is not my home. Well, it's not. And so when bad things happen and it just seems like this isn't the way things should be, well, it's because you're not home yet. And so things aren't going to be the way they're supposed to be until we all get to heaven. So we are foreigners. We are exiles. We are aliens. We are citizens of heaven. That's our main citizenship. Now, of course, most of us also are citizens of the United States of America. That's our political status here in this country. And with that come many benefits. And we enjoy those benefits, and that's a good thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. Paul was a Roman citizen, if you remember. And there were times when Paul used that citizenship to his advantage. You remember they arrested him and they beat him. I guess, they didn't really care a lot about justice and due process in the Roman Empire. So they arrest you and then they beat you and then they say, now, what did you do wrong? And Paul said, is it all right for you to beat me when I'm a Roman citizen? And you can tell, even through all the centuries of time and through all the translation, you can tell that they backpedaled quickly. It's like, oh, wait a minute. We're sorry about that. Why don't you just go on to your next stop and we won't bother you anymore. And Paul used his citizenship as a Roman citizen to enable him to move around and to present the gospel around the world. But he also recognized that our main citizenship is in heaven. Our primary allegiance is to God. We say the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Pledge of Allegiance says that we are one nation, indivisible. No, I can't. That we are one nation under God, indivisible. You know that it didn't used to have those words under God. I think those were put in 1954. And it was in the middle of the Cold War competition with an atheist country, Russia, that to distinguish us, they put in those words under God. Yeah, and they're trying to take it out. I'll tell you, I cannot say the Pledge of Allegiance without those words. Because my allegiance is to God. And I can have allegiance to this country, but my primary allegiance has to be to God. And if the two conflict, I know who I'm going with. I'm going with God. And when I say that pledge, that this is a nation under God, what I'm saying is I have an allegiance to this country under God because of my allegiance to him. Our goal as believers should not be power, but rather moral example. How do you live as foreigners and exiles? How do you live as citizens of heaven? Peter goes on to say, live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Peter lived in a time with a terrible, evil government. Here he's saying, honor the emperor, obey the emperor and his governors. But he was under no illusions that they were just wonderful people that were only, serving their country. They eventually would kill him. And he knew that. How do you handle that? Do you start a revolution? Or do you live such good lives that you make them ashamed of their opposition of you? That you give an example? Jesus never had political power. Peter never had political power. Paul never had political power. But they turned the world upside down. They changed the world more than any Caesar or any king ever did. And it was just the force of their words and their moral example and the Spirit of God working through them. So our goal should not be power, but rather moral example. Sometimes the church has had political power, and we've seen countries where Christianity is the national religion. There's been times in this country where Christians have had really the deciding factor in a lot of elections. And it can be a heady thing. We just need to get the godly people in and everything will be all right. And yet there's problems with trying to change the world through power. It seems like Jesus explicitly rejected that. They kept trying to put a crown on his head. And the only crown he ever wore was a crown of thorns. And yet he transformed the world just with his example and just with his spiritual power. One of the problems with political power is that political power fosters a backlash. A lot of the criticism of the church today is, you guys are only just trying to make us all live like you do. In reality, that's true. A lot of Christians aren't living up to their own ideals, and yet we want to codify in law that everyone has to live like a Christian. I can tell you, there's nothing wrong with saying, let's have godly laws. I'd rather live under the laws that we have in this country that are influenced by Christianity than Sharia law in some fundamentalist Muslim countries. I can much tell you I would rather prefer this. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, let's work for godly laws and for godly leaders and all of that. But we should be speaking into that and influencing that, not allowing the political power to shape us. And not thinking that if we just got people that they legally had to act like Christians, that somehow we've solved the problems of our world. You could pass every perfect law, and it wouldn't solve the problems of the heart. And so we have to go deeper than that. I think about Moses being up on Mount Sinai, and he gets the 10 Commandments. And then God also dictated to him the books of the law. And he comes down, and what are they doing? They're having a wild orgy with a false idol. It didn't solve all the problems. He threw the tablets down. Moses was the only one who broke all 10 commandments at the same time. He broke them right there on the ground and had to go get another copy. Political power is useful for some things, but it's not going to transform our hearts and our society. In fact, you might just make it more difficult for people to come to Christ if you tell them that they have to submit to the rule of Christ when they don't have the Spirit of Christ to help them. Political power also corrupts the church, because when the church has political power, it attracts those who really don't have any adherence to the church or any faith in God, but they want to use the church for their political power. And we've seen politicians do that. You know, there's a lot of politicians waving Bibles that have never read it. And I think we have to be careful that we don't get sucked into the idea that just because people give lip service to faith, that somehow that they really are a true believer. And it can corrupt the church. We should never be so allied to political power that we are unable to criticize the moral mistakes and problems of any party or any politician. We should be able to stand back and say, that is not right. Even if I agree with you on some political points, it is not right when you do the wrong thing. We need to be able to stand up for what's right in Christ and not be sucked into. I think Billy Graham said his biggest mistake was to be too allied to the political power brokers. You know, he was kind of a chaplain to a lot of presidents, Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. The thing is, he was most identified in his relationship with Richard Nixon. And that caused him a lot of grief. When everything fell apart for Richard Nixon, we found out what he was doing behind the scenes. It caused a taint on Billy Graham's legacy as well. The only taint that I know of from a good man who kind of got too allied with the political power. So here is the question. Is the United States a Christian nation? And my answer would be, it depends on your definition of a Christian nation. There's a lot of ways that we are not a Christian nation. Here's one. Our nation has no official religion. We are not, there's no law that says Christianity is our religion. Our law says the government will not establish a religion, but it also says it will not prohibit the free exercise thereof. So we have religious freedom. You know what? I would not want to have an official religion in our country. You may think that's kind of strange for a pastor to say, but there's a lot of states, a lot of countries that have Christianity as their official religion. Most of the countries in Europe have some form of Christianity as their official religion. And in most of those countries, true Christianity is almost dead. It didn't keep it from dying when you made it official. In fact, it sort of made it look like it was just another part of the government. And if you don't like the government, then it kind of taints the whole thing about the church as well. Some people who came over to this country wanted to establish a religion. The Puritans and others wanted to establish religions in their colonies. But others that came over didn't. The Brethren came over, and you know where they settled? They settled in Pennsylvania. You know why? Because Pennsylvania said, we will be tolerant of your religion. They had been persecuted by Presbyterians, by Catholics, by Lutherans. They'd been there in the terrible wars of Europe, where every time your country got conquered, you had to convert to a different religion. And they finally said, none of you are following the Bible. They went back to the Bible and said, we're going to just base our faith on the Bible. They baptized themselves as believers, and then they lost everything because of that. And so when they came over here, They've settled in the place that said, we're not going to have an established religion. You can follow God as your conscience dictates. And you know what? That was one of the greatest gifts of this country. We have that freedom. And I don't want to keep that. You can never, by passing a law, make somebody a Christian. In a sense, there's no such thing as a Christian nation, right? A nation can't repent and accept Jesus Christ into its heart and serve him with its life. That's not what countries do. People are Christians. Countries can't be. And if you try to do it by passing a law, you're doing kind of like what Constantine did. Constantine supposedly gave his life to Jesus Christ and decided that his armies would be Christian too. And so he set them up rank and file and had them march through the waters. And that was their baptism. How many true Christians do you think came out of that water? I don't think too many. They say as they marched, they kept their right hand out of the water so that their sword hand would not be Christianized. I think they kind of made a lot of compromises on that thing. But so we have no official religion. So if we're going to say, a Christian nation is one that has an official Christian faith, we do not have that. Now, our founding principles were influenced by Christianity. Some people may deny that now, but it's so clear. Talk about some of our founding fathers. George Washington was one who was reluctant to talk about religious matters, but he was very, very involved as an Anglican in his church. He held office in his church. He was there all the time. It was very important to him in his faith. Thomas Jefferson is an interesting character. Thomas Jefferson, he wrote something like this: God who gave us life gave us liberty. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of people that these liberties are the gift of God? He's saying, if we want to have liberty, we have to remember that these are God-given gifts. The government doesn't give it to you, the government can't take it away. Not legitimately, at least. They may by force take it away, but they can't legitimately take it away. They are not to be violated, but with his wrath. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. And what he was talking about there was the sin of slavery. We had high ideals written into the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. And ladies, that meant you too. But they also didn't live up to that. And they knew it. Thomas Jefferson knew it. And he knew it was wrong. And he said he trembled for his country. He would later write, I am a real Christian, that is to say, a disciple of the doctrines of Jesus Christ. Now, let me tell you, I don't think he probably is a real Christian. Thomas Jefferson had a cut and paste Bible. He cut out all the miracles. He didn't believe any of that stuff and just got the teachings of Christ in his Bible. So he had a kind of scrapbook Bible. I don't believe he really believed the true tenets of Scripture, but he was certainly influenced by it. Patrick Henry. It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians, not on religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, peoples of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and freedom of worship here. So Patrick Henry says, this was founded by Christians, and that's why other religions are welcome. Because we realize that it's a matter of conscience. You can't force somebody to be a Christian. God doesn't force us. We shouldn't think we can force anybody else. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and first president of the American Bible Society. Alexander Hamilton, now he had a pretty colorful life. He didn't really live up to a lot of the tenets of Christianity, and he didn't attend services. And there's reasons for that in his life. I think he was ill-served by the church of his time. But he wrote, I have carefully examined the evidences of the Christian faith, And if I was sitting as a juror upon its authenticity, I would unhesitatingly give my verdict in its favor. When he was dying with a bullet lodged in his spine, lacerating his liver, he twice asked for communion. The Episcopalians came and they refused. The Presbyterians came and they refused. But he gave his testimony for Christ on his deathbed. Samuel Adams said this, "It is our duty to extend our wishes to the happiness of the great family of man. I conceive that we cannot better express ourselves than by humbly supplicating the supreme ruler of the world, that the rod of tyrants may be broken to pieces and the oppressed made free again, that wars may cease in all the earth, and that the confusions that are and have been among the nations may be overruled by promoting and speedily bringing on that holy and happy period when the kingdoms of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ may be everywhere established, and all people everywhere willingly bow to the scepter of him who is the Prince of Peace." John Hancock, who signed the Declaration of Independence and took up all the room that the other people had to write little after that, he wrote, "Resistance to tyranny becomes the Christian and social duty of each individual. Continue steadfast and with proper sense of your dependence on God, nobly defending those rights which heaven gave and no man ought to take from us." John Adams, second president, said, "Now I will avow that I then believe and now believe that those great principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God, and that those principles of liberty are as unalterable as human nature and our terrestrial mundane system." And we know that when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and that was ratified by the Continental Congress, that he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights." Meaning, you can't take those rights away. You may live in a country where they take your liberty, they take your life, but you had a right to that. And God will judge those that do that. God will judge tyrants. That was the basic principle that founded this nation. In fact, when Thomas Jefferson wrote it, he said, "We hold these truths to be sacred and inviolable." They changed it because they thought that sounded too religious. But he wrote sacred. I disagree with the Declaration of Independence. I don't think these truths are self-evident at all. Where do you get the idea that all men are created equal? When in history have people been equal in their power and all that? I think we have to find out where that came from. And I think that's a point of discussion we need to bring up. Not too long ago, there was a reporter from Politico, Heidi, and I'll try to say her name, Pritzbaila, who was talking about the Christian nationalist movement. Christian nationalism is the idea, and there's different forms of it, but basically the idea that Christians should be in charge and our country should promote or even enforce Christian faith. That's very simplistic, but it'll work as a definition. But she was talking about that, and you can look it up on the internet. She said, the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalist is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. Now, let me tell you, first of all, I am not a Christian nationalist. Like I've already told you, I don't believe that we should have an official religion in our country. I think that would do more to hurt Christianity than to help. She's wrong. That's not what Christian nationalism is. That's what America is. That our rights don't come from Congress, from the Supreme Court. They do not tell us what our rights are. Their job is to safeguard the rights God has given to us. And if they're not doing their job, we need to vote them out or whatever. but that is their job, to safeguard the rights that we by right from God have. Now, to her credit, people kind of pointed out to her, wait a minute, the Declaration of Independence says that our rights don't come from any earthly source. They come from God. And that's kind of the founding principle of our country, that it's not the king who has all the rights. It's not the government that has all the rights. It's the individual. And she did backpedal. And she said that she spoke awkwardly. So, I won't hold her to it. I'm glad she kind of backpedaled on that, because that is what America's all about. That we are equal before God, and that we have these rights that cannot rightly be taken away. These principles that these men who, have said we're basing this on God's law, the sanctity of the individual life, respect for the downtrodden or the mistreated, like women, the poor, the oppressed, different racial groups, racial equality, fairness before the law, care for the poor, and protection of the victims of oppression. All these are directly from our faith. And that's why I think they have taken hold in this country, and by example in the Western world. Now, some will say that the founders were not Christians. And like I said, I don't think Thomas Jefferson was probably really a Christian, even though he was influenced by it. They would say that they were mostly deists, people who believe that there's a God, but that he really wasn't that involved, kind of like an absentee father religion. They would say that they were influenced by the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a movement, an intellectual movement in the 17th and 18th century, that basically they were skeptical about all authority, governmental authority, religious authority. They believed in separation of church and state. They believed in liberty, the brotherhood of man, progress, and rational thought. So a lot of people will say, well, no, all these things like separation of church and state and the brotherhood of mankind and all that came from the Enlightenment. It didn't come from Christianity. What I would say is the Enlightenment came from Christianity. It sounds strange to say that when it's a skeptical, rational movement, because many of the Enlightenment leaders were anti-Christian or anti-religious. But sometimes, people don't realize what their influences are. Sometimes they don't know where they get the ideas. You'll have people who will say, oh, the God of the Bible is an evil God, and they'll point out to some problematic passages where, the Bible talks about some violent times, and they'll say, look at what God did there. And one question you have to ask is, well, where do you get your idea of evil? If there is no God, then evil doesn't mean anything. Because if you really believe in good and evil, you believe that there is a lawgiver, that there is good and evil from him. And I believe that the Enlightenment was only possible because of Christianity. And they may have rejected the root of their beliefs, but they enjoyed the fruit. And that's what the Enlightenment was all about. Many of the leaders of the Enlightenment were Christians. Isaac Newton, René Descartes, Pascal, many of the others, they were devout Christians. Now, some of them weren't. Especially in France, it was very against any kind of religion. But in other places, it wasn't so much. And I believe that they were believing these beautiful thoughts of the brotherhood of man, equality, fraternity, all these things, because they'd been influenced by the Christian worldview around them. And maybe they didn't even realize it. I mentioned before about Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, but the British historian. At 15 years old, he read The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbons. Gibbons was a historian who believed that the Roman Empire was this height of civilization, and that when it fell, the world went into chaos and he kind of popularized the idea of the Dark Ages, that after the ancient world fell, there was a period of the Dark Ages where superstition reigned and nothing much happened and there was no progress until the Enlightenment. And Tom Holland was influenced by that at the age of 15. And he started to study history. And he started to write historical novels. And then he got a PhD and started writing historical nonfiction as well. And he wrote about the Persian Wars in Greece, and he wrote about the Roman Empire. And he loved what he called the apex predators of their time. The pageantry and power of the Roman Empire just thrilled him. He said as a kid that he liked to read about Tyrannosaurus Rex and the great white shark and Megalodon and all these apex predators, and the same kind of feeling he got from these great empires. And so he wrote a history of the Roman Empire that I think is still maybe one of the great textbooks of the time about that. But then he started to realize, even though he loved reading about them, he probably wouldn't have wanted to live in those times, because he started reading about and realizing about some of the terrible things that were going on. And you think about those empires, and you think about the eugenics of the Spartans, where if anybody had any kind of infirmity or weakness, or even if they were just a girl baby, they'd just leave them out in a field and let them die. The Spartans were child molesters. It was built into their society. The slavery of the Romans, the routine slaughter of the gladiatorial games, where they would just bring in people just for entertainment to be killed. The exposure of unwanted infants, especially the girls, the raping and subjugation of women, and the feeling that it was okay, and nobody really objected to that. The public crucifixions, the torture of criminals, and then he talked about the way that Julius Caesar talked about his war in Gaul, where he bragged about how many civilians he killed. Nowadays in war, civilians are still killed in war. And it's a terrible tragedy anytime we go to war. But nowadays, if you notice, people argue about, well, we're trying to protect them, and it's just unfortunate they're dying. Back in Roman times, they weren't trying to protect them. They were proud of killing the civilians as well as the combatants. And Tom Holland looked at that and he said, why do I react against this? If we are really the inheritors of the democratic ideals of Greece and the political machinations of Rome and all these things, if that was the Western world that gave birth to us now, then why don't we still have the same attitude? No one played the victim card in the ancient world, because if you were a victim, it was because you deserved it. It was thought that the powerful should prey on the weak. It was their right. It was thought that men had the right to do whatever they wanted to women. These were all things, if you went to war with another country, if they lost and you killed off the whole country, that's because they were weak. They deserved it. No one played the victim card. The victim deserved his or her fate because of his weakness. The powerful had a right to use the weak in any way they choose. So Tom Holland said, what's different? And finally he decided it was Christianity. He said that's the only thing that changed. And he was one who said that the Enlightenment was kind of a detour from Christianity. And he said, that's why we are different. And he said, basically, I'm a Christian in every way except for the belief. He didn't believe in Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection. Well, I read an article just recently. Tom Holland has started going to church. So maybe that's changing too, because he saw the difference that Jesus made in this world and made him think, maybe there's more to him than I thought. Nowadays, people do play the victim. It's like everybody wants to claim to be the most oppressed person in the history of the world. Why would you do that? Because we have a feeling in our country that if you've been mistreated, you should be taken care of. And some people take that too far And I think it's kind of a negative result. But back in the ancient days, people wouldn't have cared. People care now, or at least they think they should care. We are not living up to all the higher ideals we have. We still have violence in this world. We still have people mistreating other people. But at least we think it's wrong now. At least we think we should be embarrassed and that we should have to justify ourselves if we're doing it. So is the United States Christian? My answer would be partly. Everyone who follows Christ and shares their faith, everyone who gives that moral example of Christ, is one little influence in bringing Christian blessings to this nation. It's so important for us to do that. I want to point out Sodom and Gomorrah were not destroyed because most of the people were evil. They were destroyed because God said there weren't 10 people that were righteous. Remember, Abraham said, what if there's 50 people? God said, I won't destroy it if there's 50 good people. Well, how about if there's 45? That's only 5 less. Just 5 difference shouldn't make that much difference, right? He said, I won't destroy it for 45. How about 30? How about 20? How about 10? And God said, I won't destroy it if there's 10. And Abraham said, okay, we're good then. And then God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. There weren't 10. He told Lot and his family to get out, and then he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. I think about Jeremiah. Jeremiah was told to go around and look for one righteous person. Jeremiah 5:1, go up and down the streets of Jerusalem, look around and consider, search through her squares. If you can find but one person who deals honestly and seeks the truth, I will forgive this city. There wasn't one. God said, I'll forgive them all if there's just one. And Jeremiah couldn't find one. So if you live out your faith as a righteous man or woman, number one, you'll be blessed. Because there's no better way to live than to live in the way Christ taught us. Number two, you'll improve the fabric of your community. God tells us to do things that are a blessing to other people. And the surprise is, you're blessed when you do them. But other people are blessed too. And then number three, you will give God a reason to bless your nation. God's looking into our lives. He's looking for righteous people. I remember Tim Solomon said his favorite verse was that the eyes of the Lord are going to and fro to find the hearts of one person whose thoughts are fixed on him. God's watching. We can be a blessing if we follow him.